And now there are circumstances, are there not, when the EPA has direct responsibility for, and that's when...
And that's when we have issued a license for a particular activity. And in fact, sometimes that license could be issued to a local authority. So in some cases, we just have a supervisory role over local authorities, and in other cases, we are the regulator, and we regulate local authorities. So for example, if a local authority is running a landfill site or a waste transfer station, they would have to apply to us for a license. We would give them, having considered it, a license with conditions, and then we would enforce the terms of that license as we would for any other industry who had applied to us.
And if an industry or a company was illegally dumping waste on its own site, how would EPA, and EPA was informed about that, how would you investigate that?
Well, that would be a very significant breach of their license, and would either be discovered by somebody telling us that, or very likely be discovered by us having visited the site and audited it, because that's one of the things that we do with the licenses. So it would be difficult to hide an illegal dump on a site from the inspectors, but so how we would approach that is we have authority under the Act to take a prosecution ourselves if it's a prosecution that would be taken in the district court, which is our lower courts, and if it is a more serious breach and we want to go to a higher court, we have to take a case through the Director for Public Prosecutions. And that's what we would do. We would gather the evidence, write the affidavits, prepare a file, send it to the DPP, and the DPP would then decide whether to take a case or not. If it was a less serious case, we'd do all the same things, but we would do it through our own legal people.
And you have both resources for investigation and doing sampling and for laboratory testing?
Yes, we do. We have the labs and we have the resources to investigate and sample and all of that. And if it were, in the same way as with the local authorities, if it were a very specialist job, we would of course call in somebody from outside, a consultancy firm, if we felt it merited that.
And what's the funding source for both the local authorities and for yourself in terms of doing that kind of work? Because sometimes investigations would be quite expensive.
Yes, indeed they could. We all, well, certainly the EPA has a grant from the government for start, so we get Exchequer funding. We also charge license fees for the licensing, and we charge enforcement fees in terms of enforcement. There is also provision in all of the acts, both the Waste Management Acts and the EPA Act, for us to recover, to have investigations carried out and to recover the costs from the person. So we can do it like that. But in terms of sort of more general investigations and running the enforcement network and doing the sort of general enforcement work that we do, we also get money from the Department of the Environment, who administer what's called an environment fund. And that fund is made up of monies that come in through a landfill tax and through the famous plastic bag levy.
Yes.
So that money is ring fenced into an environment fund and is spent in general on enforcement issues.
But also for the
local authorities as well as ourselves.
That's where they get their funds.
That's where they get theirs. But I think both the local authorities and ourselves, if we need to have an investigation carried out on somebody's site, can recover the costs from the person.
Okay. And if the company is bankrupt or there's nobody there responsible, are there funds available for a cleanup as well?
Well, that makes it more difficult. We have very few of those, luckily, at the moment. In those cases, the state has to step in. There isn't. It's not like in the United States with the CERCLA fund. There isn't a dedicated fund for cleanup.
Okay. Now, Mary, in switching to another area, what's on your agenda for the next 6 months or so in terms of issues that are kind of critical? I mean, there are many, but what are some of the issues?
Well, some of the issues. I mean, the biggest issue that's on our agenda at the moment is the whole issue of climate change. It's on our agenda for many reasons, political and otherwise. The summit, the COP meeting in Copenhagen, is really critical at the moment, and it is really essential that we, and when I say we, the nations of the world, do come to an agreement in Copenhagen about how to reduce carbon emissions. The IPCC has told us, as a number of people have said, well, I'm sure the IPCC don't say it in these terms, but we're in the last chance saloon. Mm-hmm. We either agree now to cut emissions, or we really miss the opportunity to keep within the 2-degree rise. Mm-hmm. That the scientists are telling us is the maximum we can have. Mm-hmm. And if we don't agree now in Copenhagen, there won't be any prospect of us staying within that 2-degree. And then we're into a different ball game altogether. We really are into very, very significant climate change.
And yet it's depressing news from America, in the sense that the Congress seems to be indicating that they're not going to be addressing climate change legislation before next year. So the Americans will be going there without much of a contribution.
And yet we have China this morning saying that they are going to lead on it. So I'm not a politician, and I don't claim to understand how all these negotiations go. You also have Gordon Brown yesterday saying that government leaders should go to Copenhagen and not environment ministers. That would significantly up the ante. Mm-hmm. All I can say is that as a scientist and as an environmentalist, we have only one chance at this. Mm-hmm. If we let it go over the 2 degrees, we just don't know what we're getting into, but we do know it'll be bad.
And you're optimistic that something real will happen in Copenhagen?
I'm an optimist. I can't believe that the human race will do this to itself.
Please hold on to that optimism for us, would you please? Thank you very much, Mary, for being with us today.
Not